Welcome to the Go Reflect Yourself podcast, bringing you real strategies to cultivate the life and business of your dreams, full of freedom and fulfillment, starting from the inside out. Working hard and staying busy will only get you so far. To truly become happy, content, and who you're meant to be, we have to move beyond physical capacities and begin to look from within. We have to change our thoughts and our mindset into our most powerful assets, transforming you to take inspired action so you can become a better version of yourself and to have the life of your dreams.
You are stronger than you believe. You have greater powers than you know.
Welcome to the Go Reflect Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Heather Crider, and this is the place where we provide 60-second brain-based reflection strategies for your success in all key areas of your life so you can connect with yourself first and then have the life of your dreams. Joining me today is a lady that is no stranger to reflection. Ms. Roz Savage is the first and so far only woman to row solo across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. Roz took an unexpected career move as a former management consultant who doesn't particularly enjoy exercise, but she was inspired to brave the oceans when she realized two things. We're all capable of much more than we tend to believe we are, and we need to make some serious changes if we're going to live healthy lives on a thriving planet. So she used her voyages to expand her own limits and promote sustainable living. Now Roz writes, speaks, and lectures on sustainability, courage, resilience, and change, and she is an absolute delight. And Roz, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure, Heather. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. And what time is it? I want to have a balance here because we talk so much about sustainability and really being able to connect in this world. So you're clear across the globe here and it's evening your time, isn't it?
It's 5 p.m. here. Yeah, so still quite a civilized time.
Well, thank you for being civilized with us this evening. I just want to jump straight in and ask the question. Why did you decide to row across an ocean?
Seemed like a perfectly good idea at the time. Well, it was kind of one of those ideas that had me rather than me having the idea. And I don't know if this resonates with you or your listeners, but I'd had this environmental awakening after leaving management consulting. I'd set out to create a new life, but really not knowing what that life was going to look like. And then I'd spent some time in Peru having my first ever kind of adventure backpacking around there for several months. And while I was there, I was up in the Andes and the people there were telling me that the glaciers there are retreating. And this was back in 2003. And I think we sometimes forget just how much more aware of climate change we are now than we were then. We definitely know the climate is changing, no matter what you think the reasons for that are. So I'd found my purpose. I mean, to me, this just seemed, once I did some more research, not just about climate change, but about what's happening to the Amazon and what's happening in the oceans and what's happening in the ozone layer. To me, it just felt like literally the most important purpose on earth was to do something to try and promote sustainability. But I had no idea what to do. And so for about 6 frustrating months, I was burning with this passion, but didn't know what to do about it. And I was like, come on, universe, like I'm here, I'm ready, I'm willing, I'm able, give me a job. And one day I was on a long drive and you know how sometimes you're still wide awake and you're focused on the driving, but your brain sort of goes into, well, you know, mindfulness, meditation, your brain goes into a slightly different state. And it's like all of that mental chatter shuts up for long enough for something else to come through. So whether you want to call that the subconscious or intuition or the right hemisphere of the brain, or God, or the universe, whatever you want to call it.
Or all the above.
Or all of the above. It's basically
Right?
pretty much all the same thing.
Yeah.
This idea just popped into my head, kind of fully formed. Yes, I had rowed before, but, you know, in a boat with 8 other people. And I was looking for something adventurous. I was feeling very inspired by the solitary contemplatives, the Buddhist nuns and monks who go on very long solo retreats. So all of those influences were kind of already there, but I hadn't put it all together. And yeah, suddenly this light bulb went on over my head, and like all the best calls to adventure, there was that excitement, but also this massive ambivalence. There was like the hell yeah, and then there was the no. Like you said in your introduction, I don't particularly like exercise, and I am quite scared of oceans, which I think is a very rational position to take. So, and it was also just so ridiculously audacious. I mean, it was so far beyond anything that I'd ever done before that part of me was like, oh yes, like count me in. And then another part was, I think this message got delivered to the wrong person, because I'm not that big, brave, badass. You definitely wanted somebody else.
Are you supposed to pass this on to someone else? Was that the message?
Yeah, yes. So there was this sort of battle. It was like here, I knew yes in my heart, but in my head, that self-preserving ego was thinking of a million reasons why it was a really horrible idea. But eventually, took about a week. The heart persuaded the head that actually this was a good idea. So the head went, well, if we were going to do this, then what would the to-do list look like? So I started doing my Excel spreadsheet of all of the things that I would need to do to make this happen. And, you know, once you've done that, you're kind of committed, really.
Once you put it in Excel, it's a done deal, right?
There we go. Yes, exactly.
So you're in Peru and you're having these kind of mini solitude experiences, but you're connecting with the world through that. So that was kind of the original lens to say, there's this bigger world out here, and I know I need to make a bigger impact and to be able to connect to that and have a message. So really it was this evolution, if you will. And then as you keep putting it out there, asking for clarification, that's when the pieces came together. And then, like you said, when you're on the drive and your mind attaches to it, that's when maybe the light bulb finally went off of, oh my gosh, this could really be a thing.
Yeah, well, this really connects with my story about how life works. And this is something that I've come to understand over the last 15 years or so. It's certainly not the way that I was brought up. But I believe that when we show up, as I was, going, come on, give me a job, that when we make ourselves available, I was in that sort of yin receptive phase at that time, which you sort of have to, you know, they're saying about emptying your own cup. So that you've got space for something new and exciting to come in. So I had created the space, the opportunity for that sort of yang creative spark to come in like a thunderbolt and give me the job. And I feel like it's this constant dance that at times I'm being more sort of yang and getting out there and knocking on doors and waiting to see which doors open and which ones stay resolutely shut. Or I'm learning about new things. I suppose at those times I'm pushing the river, but then there are times when I just sort of kick back into yin mode and go, all right, life, I've been proactive for a while. Now I'm just going to wait a little and create some space for you to have your say. So there are so many books that have really influenced my thinking. One of my favorites is The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer, which is where he decided he'd be going through a phase of really intense meditation and had actually thought he was going to be a contemplative. that, you know, his life was going to be about meditating for 6 hours a day or whatever. But life seemed to have other ideas for him.
Mm-hmm.
And early on his journey, he arrived at a sort of policy decision that when he felt that life was calling him to do something, even if it didn't feel particularly in tune with his likes and dislikes, he would just go, okay. And it ended up crafting a really amazing and very engaged life, still very grounded in his spiritual practice. But he ended up not just having one multi-million pound business, dollar business, but a sequence of them, which isn't to say it was all easy. The climax of the book is a very big and very unpleasant FBI investigation that really, you know, was his, you know, cave, the innermost cave of trials and tribulations on his hero's journey. But that book has really helped to give me that trust in life, that if I keep showing up, that life will guide me in service of my personal evolution. But then the sort of beauty of that is that whatever I do in service of my evolution seems to also support the collective evolution.
That's so amazing. And thank you for sharing that, because it just reminds me how so many people really seek to get to that point and maybe not even understanding it. Because like you said, we're not trained to think like that. We're trained to make a plan. You do the plan, you fulfill the plan, and then most people don't go beyond that. You know, we're trained to think in that way. So I'm curious if we can back up even more, because you were a management consultant. And if I'm not mistaken, you had a series, because you didn't just go one day from a management consultant to being in the middle of an ocean. That wasn't an overnight thing. But you had some series of envisioning exercises and things that you kind of had to do. And I'm really interested, because what you're talking about of being in that receptive mode, that's a scary place. And I would imagine it took you a long time to get from point A to B to obviously to being in the ocean. So can you talk a little bit more about some of those exercises and maybe a little bit of that evolution? Because a management consultant, that's safety, right? And
yes, yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes. Well, it did give me the skill with Excel spreadsheets, so that came in useful later on. Yes, I'd love to share that. It was about a 5-year journey. And of course, it's an ongoing journey as well. You know, it's certainly not job done. It's a life's work. But yeah, the particular steps during those particularly pivotal 5 years, really the first one, there's a small one first, now I'll come to a big one. The first one was I'd gone into management consulting because I'd grown up in this family with not very much money. My parents were both Methodist preachers, and here in the UK, they certainly don't get paid very well. So I thought it was pretty boring not having any money. And so I was willing to sell my soul, you know, just give me a good paycheck, in the belief that that ultimately would make me happy. And I guess I'm a bit slow on the uptake, because it took me about 11 years to go, you know what? I'm actually really unhappy. So clearly this plan is not working. So then I had to come up with a better plan. And it also took some courage to go, this isn't working for me. I'm not saying it doesn't work for other people, but it wasn't working for me. And so to sort of go, oops, 11 years, wrong, you know, ladder of success against wrong building. So what really, really brought it home to me that I needed to make some big changes was a wonderful exercise from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. And there's this exercise to imagine it's your own funeral, which I know a lot of people might go, ugh, but actually I think it's a really important framing, because apart from anything else, it reminds us that we don't have forever to create the life that we love. We are mortal, and one of these days it is going to be us in the casket. So you imagine it's your own funeral, and you write 2 versions of what people are going to be saying about you in tribute to the life that you lived. The version that you want, and the version that you're heading for if you carry on living your life as you are. And when I did that exercise towards the end of my time as a management consultant, needless to say, those two versions were poles apart. The one that I was heading for was very safe, as you say, very, very nice, very conventional, ticked all the boxes of what a successful life was supposed to look like. But what really got me excited was the fantasy one, like, how do I want to be remembered? And it was a bit sparse on the details. It certainly didn't mention rowing across oceans. It didn't mention being a sustainability advocate. It was much more about how it would feel to me to be me. So I was sort of, I suppose, putting myself in the shoes of one of the people at my funeral, that I would have come across as somebody who seemed to just get out there and live the heck out of life. You know, that I was confident and brave, and even if I failed, I would try again and learn something from it. And, you know, I was just full of zest and excitement about this life thing. And it's strange because at the time that I was writing this, my life could not have been more different. My self-esteem was completely going down the drain because I was doing this soul-sucking job that I wasn't thriving in, wasn't particularly succeeding in it. So I was in a bad place. But as I wrote that fantasy version, and just like, it was just like I'd opened a door into a parallel universe, you know, the sliding doors, where I was living the life that I was supposed to be living, and was feeling happy and fulfilled and purposeful, and yeah, just showing up for life and life showing up for me. So even then, though, it took a while, because I looked at these two sheets of paper that I'd just written, and I was like, whoa, like, this is scary. I mean, like, that version, that is just not possible. I can't see how I can get from where I am to there. It just seemed, you know, I just couldn't see the bridge. I could imagine
so much of a fantasy that the brain that you were used to thinking in could, even though it was your imagination that you created, you still couldn't picture yourself completely in that. Not yet.
That's right. And again, you know, it's kind of like when I had that inspiration to row the oceans, it was like when I did that exercise, my heart was going, hell yeah. And my brain, like, you know, the self-preserving ego mind was going, no, here's a million reasons why that's a terribly bad idea. I mean, apart from anything else, you know, you're going to have to quit your job. You're probably going to have to leave your husband. And I did. Like, what about your salary? How are you going to live? What about your home? You know, it's, you know, so.
But it made you feel a certain way. Despite that fear, you still felt something, some connection to that.
Absolutely. And, you know, even though I tried to forget all about it, I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. And it was like, for a moment, my poor long-suffering soul, you know, how that job, I was about to describe it, but I'll leave off the adjective. How that job really felt like it was eroding my soul, like it was on its last gasp. And it was almost like, in that moment, I'd said, soul, I want to hear you. I want to hear from you about how I should be living my life. And the soul had gone, yay, I thought you'd never ask. And here's my vision. So it actually got a bit sort of messy after that. You know, often these transitions, we go into them kicking and screaming because the ego mind is still clinging to the old and familiar, even when we know the old and familiar is not working for us.
Right.
So more subconsciously, you know, there's a lot of unconscious behavior. I managed to sort of sabotage my career and my marriage, and my life probably looked like a complete train wreck, but actually it was a very important letting go. Again, you know, creating that space, that emptiness for the fresh and the new and the exciting to come in to replace all of that old dead stuff that just wasn't working for me. So actually, even as those trappings of my old life disappeared, And according to the conventional Western view of success, you know, it sounds like I was just failing in every possible way.
You were
But
having a
actually, I
midlife
felt
crisis.
liberated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. Because that was the other thing. I'd been so good at jumping through everybody else's hoops.
Mm-hmm.
You know, give me an exam and I'll pass it. Give me a job interview and I'll ace it. And when you're good at jumping through other people's hoops, it becomes sort of addictive because people are going, good job.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have the accolades. And it's only when you go, what happened? Like, I'm living somebody else's life, that you go, oh, those hoops weren't mine.
Yeah.
I've got to find some better hoops. So anyway, yeah. So there was a lot of experimentation during that time. I dabbled in various new careers. I learned something from all of my dabblings about what worked for me and what didn't work for me, about what made my heart sing and what didn't. And that's really what brought me to that point on the long drive later on, after the environmental awakening, when it really all just clicked into place. And I had the biggest call to adventure that I'd never dared to imagine. So yeah, I've been very, very fortunate. But I think, you know, when we show up for life, it shows up for us. And I've certainly felt very guided ever since then, and very much continue to do so.
You mentioned courage earlier, and yes, I mean, there's so much courage inside of your story throughout all of it. Like you said, this is an ongoing journey, but I think it's really important to highlight, even though your ladder to success may have been propped up against the wrong building, at the time you were climbing that ladder, and this is where most people find themselves. You make decisions with the information you have at the time. And that's what you did as well. In this conventional picture of success, you did all the right things. And it doesn't mean that it was bad. It just means that those were the decisions that you were making until you had the courage to ask yourself the hard questions. And so I really want to highlight that, because that exercise you did and really envisioning this possible, this imagined, ridiculous, like you said, this outlandish future, how does that feel in comparison to where you were? So I just want to highlight that, because I think that's really one of the big tipping points that most people really don't have the courage to ask themselves the hard questions. They just keep going and going. And like you said, you had this melting pot of feelings and life that you weren't happy with until you really stopped and saw it in a different way. Wouldn't you say that's pretty common?
Well, at the time, it just felt like desperation. Like I say, I was in such a bad place. I was like, something has to change because this is not working.
Yeah.
And I do think that that sort of unhappiness, I mean, yes, unfortunately, our world offers an awful lot of ways to numb that unhappiness. We can sort of make it go away with medication or alcohol or any other kind of addiction. So I'm maybe... I don't think there was any particular courage in not numbing. I suppose it did take, to me at the time, it didn't feel like courage. It was just like, oh my God, I need some answers here. And yeah, the 7 Habits, and I was devouring self-help books around that time. And I know in many ways it's a much maligned genre, but actually it's helped me so much, because it does enable us to stand on the shoulders of giants and start finding a way out of our pit of despair. I think the times that I have been aware of my sorry, there was another point I wanted to make there. When you were talking about the decisions that I made were the best decisions that I could make from the information I had available at those times. And I wouldn't change a thing about my past. I sometimes get asked, do you regret the 11 years that you spent in management consultancy? And no, I don't, because many, many reasons. I mean, apart from the Excel skills, it also gave me a sufficient head of steam to achieve that escape velocity. You know how a rocket needs a certain amount of power to escape the Earth's gravitational pull. You know, by the time I left London, I was so desperate to get out of there. You know, they didn't see me for dust. So it was all perfect. And that's really my philosophy about life, is that even when it doesn't look like we want it to look, if we just try and find the gift, you know, I'm not sure that everything happens for a reason, but if I tell myself there is a reason for this, I am going to find the gift in this. I'm always inspired by Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning after his horrendous time in Auschwitz. And, you know, if you can manage to find the gift in being in a concentration camp and losing your entire family, then heck, you know, any of us can find the gift in anything, because I don't think it gets any worse than that.
That gives me goosebumps, just because we get stuck, like you said, our ego, we get stuck in our own lives and our own despair and this I, me, and it's really hard to be able to look outside of yourself in this existential crisis sometimes. And that's where these stories and being able to hear what other people have gone through. And I think that's a really great bridge to kind of talk about this polarity and yin and yang and this balance that we really are seeking and we don't know it. So I know part of your, I guess, current platform, because you speak so much on sustainability and being able, like you said, to preserve this life that we have and this planet that we live on. But can you talk to that a little bit more about from a balance perspective? Because you've been such an advocate of so many things, but it all starts, you know, we keep kind of going full circle. It starts with each individual too.
Well, I'm doing this doctoral program at the moment, which has actually been, at the ripe old age of 52, has been giving me an amazing opportunity to take all of these shiny ideas that have attracted my magpie mind over the last 15 years and go, why am I here? What is my message? What's sort of at the root of all of this? And I'm coming round to a fairly Buddhist perspective in many ways, and especially the yin-yang model. I'm sure everybody's seen the disc of the black and the white, slightly spirally shapes. And that idea that it is about the balance between the two. And I think there is a lot in our Western civilization that doesn't really fully appreciate that concept, that for every birth there's a death, for every summer there's a winter, for every day there's a night. And yet we attach, in our non-Buddhist way, we attach to the light, to the summer, to the life. And as the poet David Whyte says, if you think life is always improving, you're going to miss half of it. And it's so recognizing that there is that, not duality, but the complementary nature of these two things, and that each requires the other. And another idea that I've been playing with a lot is about we need to shift from domination to partnership. And I'll just explain that a bit more. We live in a very dominator-oriented world, and I've been particularly influenced by the work of Rihanna Eisler, who initially came to this through gender issues, that in a patriarchal society, generally men have dominated women. But when you have patriarchy in that context, you also generally have it in a lot of other contexts, like humans dominating nature. And we're now seeing where that's taking us. Also, the developed world dominating the developing world, or strong people dominating weak people, rather than seeing that we're all connected, we're all actually in partnership. And when we see that the fusion of the yin and the yang, of the male and the female, of the political left and the political right, I'm even going to dare to say that, actually makes everything better. Also thinking about, economic inequality. Even if you're one of the guys who's at the top of the pile and has got all the toys, that's a pretty unsustainable place to be, because, you know, okay, I probably better not go there. There's a lot I could say about that. So it is really about seeing, not seeing yin and yang, light and dark, as polar opposites, but seeing them as being all part of an interconnected whole. And I think if we're going to have any way at all out of our present ecological crisis, then we need to really, on that deep level, recognize our deep interconnection with each other and with the other aspects of nature. Yeah. And until we get there, anything else that we do is just going to be a band-aid on a massive gaping wound.
Yeah, that's a huge point, and I really appreciate that, because again, it's not pretending that another view doesn't exist. It's being able to take a different perspective and say, okay, how can we have these two very different perspectives and issues, and many issues that cause a lot of difficulty, but how do we have coordination and partnership and compromise and compassion?
Love that word, compassion.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you're saying. We have all these bigger issues, but how do we still have all these complementary things in spite of that?
Yeah, and it sort of feels like, again, it's that ego mind and the soul wisdom, that we become very attached to our position, politically or whatever, when our ego is invested. And when we can actually come at it from more of a heartfelt, I hope this doesn't sound too sort of woo-woo or hippie or love and peace, but you know, when we can actually, to use your word, compassion, have that compassionate soul connection with somebody else, and to recognize that if we had been born into the circumstances that they're born into and been influenced by the things they've been influenced by, we would probably see the world the way that they see it.
Exactly. No, that's huge. And again, I appreciate the getting out of yourself, getting beyond the I and the me, and asking those questions though. And you have to ask the questions with yourself as well. Why am I doing this? Why am I thinking this? But it's a partnership. That's beautiful. Thank you for pursuing that. And despite all your wild ideas over the last 15 years, I think that's a really important evolution that you've gone through. And look at all the amazing change that you're impacting because of that. So it's not a crazy wild idea by any means.
Well, I suppose if the ocean taught me anything, it was humility, in the sense that, just briefly to tell a salty old sea story. When I was rowing the Atlantic, it was a terrible, terrible year to be on the ocean. It was the year of Hurricane Katrina and Rita and Wilma, and actually there were 28 named storms that year, which was the worst year ever. And that had consequences. I got injured, all of my oars broke, everything broke, actually, really. And I was so indignant. Like, my ego mind was, what the hell? I'm out here to be a champion for nature, and nature just seems to be beating me up every which way. This was not the script. This was not how it was supposed to go. And I realized, it actually took me about 10 years to see the gift in every single thing that went wrong. I went, oh, now I get it. If everything had gone perfectly smoothly according to plan, I would not have found out anywhere near what I found out about my resourcefulness, my courage, my ability to just keep going when I don't want to. So it was actually the biggest crash course in personal development that I've ever had, but I had to learn to surrender to it, to stop fighting reality, because there was a lot of reality fighting going on and I was not winning that battle. So I really just had to go, okay, ocean. I mean, I swore a lot at the ocean too. I won't use any of those words right now. But there was a lot of bad
understandably so too, yes. Right? Oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
But, oh my God, it was my best teacher, my best teacher ever. And it did really cut my ego right down to size. and there it stays, but in a healthy way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I sometimes wish that we could put our political leaders out to sea in a small rowboat for 3, 4, 5 months, because I came back changed in good ways.
I can only imagine. And again, what a huge parallel to the storms that we all deal with. Obviously not in that level, clearly, but you had to go through that to see it and to be able to look at the lessons. And again, everybody has their own storms.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't think you can compare my storms with your storms or anybody else's storms. Like at the time that we're in a storm, it's hard. It feels intense. I don't think that, you could say my storms were tough, but heck, I chose to be out there. A lot of people face storms, or like a perfect storm of a whole multitude of things hitting them all at once, maybe a diagnosis and a bereavement and a house burning down. And, for some people, they just seem to get absolutely bombarded all at once. So, and they don't get to choose any of that. So I actually feel like I've been incredibly fortunate. I volunteered to be out there.
That's
Nobody
a fair
forced
point.
me.
It is a fair point, but I not many people would have made that choice. But that's obviously, and again, you have such a huge platform to be able to talk about so many things, but you even said it took you a while to see the gifts that you actually received. So that's still this thread that despite even the triumphs that we overcome, the things that we do, it still takes a while to see the blessings from them. So you've
Yeah.
got all these gifts.
Well, after the Atlantic, I knew I'd been on this really steep learning curve, and I hadn't really had the time or the bandwidth to process it all. So
Mhm.
I think in the months and years after that was where the mindfulness, the integration really came in to reflect on that. And I actually felt like I'd failed in so many ways. I mean, yes, I'd managed to cross the ocean, but I'd managed my thoughts and my emotions so poorly. And I knew I was going to do the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So I really wanted to learn the lessons so that the next time around I could do better. And I do think that that work of reflection and that inner inquiry is always time well spent, because these are very transferable skills. But often when we've been through a bad time, we just want to put it all behind us. But then we don't really get the benefit of all of the gifts and the learning opportunities in there.
Yeah.
So
Is
it
that
can
why
be
you did
hard.
the other two? Is that why you did it again? Because you felt like you still had more lessons to learn?
I'd actually, from the outset, always intended to do all three. So if I'd have
Okay.
stopped after the Atlantic, I would have felt like a quitter. But
Yeah.
it did actually help me on the Atlantic to think, oh, I'm making such a hash of this, but to think, I will learn and I will do, I'm learning how not to row an ocean, or how not to manage my thoughts and emotions. And the next time I will do better. And so it was just really clear to me that I had to do that integration work and really take those lessons and weave them into the fabric, like at the cellular level of who I am, so that I would just default to those better, sort of more philosophical, less ego attached ways of being in the future, whether that's on the ocean or off it, because these are life lessons. These are not specific to rowing across oceans at all. And I think especially for us as we speak now in September 2020, the whole world has just been through a massive learning opportunity, and we're still going through it. And I do hope that we don't let this have been in vain. I hope that we do take that time out for some reflection and say, what did I learn about myself? I know a lot of people have really struggled with isolation during shelter in place and lockdown. And heck, I am better experienced than probably at least 99% of humanity to cope with isolation. But I've struggled. I went through about 6 weeks of really being in a slump about it. And so it's hard. Yeah. And the good thing is that hard times are our best teachers.
They are.
So I hope that we do take some wisdom forward from this.
And you wrote a book throughout that time frame too, right?
I did. I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm so terrible at self-promotion. I wrote a book, thank you, Heather, called The Gifts of Solitude, precisely to try and help people through lockdown, because I realised that it's not easy, and that this was something where I had a certain skill set that I could share. So the subtitle is A Short Guide on How to Survive and Thrive in Isolation. And it's really my accumulated wisdom from the 520 days total that I spent at sea. The surviving part is really about the Atlantic, where I was just hanging on to my sanity by my fingertips. And then the thriving part is really about the later oceans, where I learned to appreciate and be tremendously grateful for those opportunities to be alone with myself and really get to know those voices that we all have in our heads that sometimes can be very unkind. But when we, again, learn to be in partnership with them, rather than trying to dominate them or allowing them to dominate us, they can actually be really helpful. They're there for a reason.
That's a great point, because I think right now people can relate more than ever. This might be one of the big first storms a lot of people are having to really deal with, and understanding these feelings. And when you're forced to do it, it can be a little scarier. So I really like that perspective, this not just a global partnership with others in the world, but having that partnership with yourself to be able to say, this is part of life. And these feelings I'm having and being aware of them doesn't mean they're bad or wrong. This is something I'm experiencing. So now how do I move forward and thrive in spite of having to go through this? So I love that. I think it's a great point.
Beautifully said. And the only thing I would tweak a tiny bit is thrive because of this, rather than in spite of this, to actually say, this is all part of my soul's evolution. And it sucks right now because, whatever your situation is, your vacation's being cancelled, or you've lost loved ones, or, it sucks. But how can I thrive? How can this experience, tough as it has been, how can this support my future thriving in some way?
That's perfect. I love that. And that's that's a bridge to everything that you're working on. So thank you for all of those messages. So 2 quick questions for you. You mentioned a book earlier. Is that the one book, or do you have another? If you could recommend that someone read a book, what one would that be?
Oh, well, it depends on their situation, but I would say if The Gifts of Solitude is like my greatest hits of like my life lessons learned, distilled from all of the speaking and the thinking and the reading that I've done. But if you want a really great adventure story, then I've written Rowing the Atlantic, which is about rowing the Atlantic, and Stop Drifting, Start Rowing, which is about my Pacific crossing.
That's awesome. And then if you could recommend a 60-second brain strategy, or just strategy, just a 60-second strategy for when people are dealing with whatever, what would your recommendation be?
So many I could choose, but I'm going to plump for what I call the retrospective perspective, which is about when we get stuck in our emotions right now and we're just full of like, this sucks, I'm miserable, get me out of here. When I was on the Atlantic, I learned to hold a vision of how proud in the future me was going to be of how I showed up on this day, when I was in pain with tendinitis, I was exhausted, I didn't want to row, but I held it together and I showed up and I did my 12 hours of rowing. So it helped me to get some perspective on the present moment and go, how will the future me, how can I make the future me proud of the present me?
I love that. I love that. Thank you. It's being able to take a look at who is that you want to become.
Exactly.
Yes.
Beautifully said. You're so articulate.
That's been one of the biggest things I've been working on. And quite frankly, that's part of why I'm doing this podcast, but that bigger platform. I know there's people who believe in find your what, find your why, but I think it's more important. First, you have to see the who. Who do you want to become?
Yes.
Then back into answering those other questions. That's
absolutely. Actually, that is exactly what I've been saying in my keynotes that I've had to do virtually this summer. I have like the pyramid, and the who is like the foundation, and then the what and the why.
I knew there was a reason we connected. Roz, thank you so much for being here today. I will put in our show notes rozsavage.com, and then I will also put notes to your new book and as well as your others. So I really, really appreciate you being here today.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Heather.
And thank you for watching or listening to Go Reflect Yourself, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Go Reflect Yourself. For more inspired action or to stay in touch, head on over to heatherjcrider.com. Or you can follow me on Instagram at #HeatherJCrider or #GoReflectYourself. Until next time, I'm challenging you to go reflect yourself. We'll see you soon.